And the new year has already arrived on the other side of the globe, with some countries carrying on with their parties despite concerns about the pandemic.
And like last year, we're all hoping that this new year will be better. Nikki Ford, BBC London.
Well, in just over 5 hours here in the UK, we'll be leaving 2021 behind and hoping for a rather better 2022 in so many ways. But the new year has already arrived on the other side of the globe. Australia, as usual, one of the first places to mark the new year with its traditional fireworks display in Sydney Harbour. But festivities around the world are said to be rather more muted in many places, with celebrations scaled back or cancelled in some countries.
Here, the UK had the warmest New Year's Eve on record today. The Met Office says the temperature reached 15.3 degrees in Coningsby, Lincolnshire, beating the previous mark of 14.8 from 2011. Meanwhile, while our countdown continues, around the world the new year has already begun. In Hong Kong, the Philharmonic Orchestra played in 2022 with a live performance over the countdown display and fireworks. Children performed on stage in Pyongyang in North Korea. And in Sydney, the traditional fireworks show burst over the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House.
Countries around the world are seeing in the new year with a bang, but some are holding scaled-back celebrations to try to stop COVID spreading. This is the scene at an empty Red Square in Moscow as the clock strikes midnight. This is the scene live. And let's begin this hour by taking you live to Russia, to Moscow's Red Square, where the fireworks are underway to mark the beginning of the new year. But no one in the square watching them. The square itself closed off to the public to try to curb the spread of coronavirus. Of course, people across Russia, across the world, watching these images. This display coming as the Russian President Vladimir Putin has released his New Year's Eve address, his New Year address, saying that he thanks Russians for their resilience during tough times. Saying this dangerous epidemic has engulfed all continents and does not yet go away. But he said, more importantly, we overcame all the difficulties of the outgoing year together, protected those who found themselves in a difficult situation, and supported people from older generations. So President Putin thanking Russians for their resilience during the COVID pandemic, which of course is very much in evidence as we watch the new year come in various parts of the world, with celebrations scaled back around the world for a second new year. Well, New Year's Eve celebrations across the world have been scaled back, as I was mentioning, as the more infectious Omicron variant continues to drive up cases. But despite that, the displays have been just as spectacular. This is how Dubai rang in the new year. Firework display at the Burj Khalifa as spectacular as ever. It's now 2022 in Asia, while people in Africa and parts of Europe are just a few hours away from seeing the new year arrive too. However, in many places, those celebrations have been muted or will be muted as governments try to discourage crowds from coming together to counter the spread of COVID. Now, countries across the world have been ringing in the new year. Let's have a look at some of the celebrations, starting in Sydney.
the wall.
Swagger pit.
Doors opening. This is a Platinum Jubilee Line train to
2022.
our first stop is
Carnival.
exit here for
Culture, colours and sound. Funny floor.
the next station is
Wembley.
exit here for
Football's greatest moment.
The men did us proud in the Euros last year. Can the women go one better? The players take the knee, united in their stance against racism. Again and again they stream forward, looking for an opening. This looks promising and... That is brilliant! That is world class! The crowd goes wild! The country goes wild!
We hope to see you in London for the UEFA Women's Euros. 2022 will be huge for sport across the UK.
As the world welcomes a new year, London puts on a surprise in the skies. Lasers and fireworks mark the start of 2022, celebrations kept secret to deter the crowds. This is the scene in Rio De Janeiro's Copacabana beach. We're live there in just a moment as the new year begins in Brazil. Countries around the world have been ringing in the new year, and this hour we're taking to Brazil. Let's bring you some live pictures now. Fireworks going off there in Rio de Janeiro's Copacabana beach after initially cancelling celebrations. Rio de Janeiro is staging fireworks on the beach, but the usual concert won't be happening. But as you can see, it's a pretty spectacular fireworks display there on Copacabana beach, the famous beach, scaled back, but as you can see, pretty spectacular display there happening in Brazil. Now let's bring you some live pictures from Copacabana beach. It is of course New Year across the world. We've had it in Sydney and New Zealand first, then in many other countries, the UK around about 3 hours ago, and this is what's happening in Brazil at the moment. Incredible fireworks going on at the famous Copacabana beach. A scaled back performance, but as you can see, fairly spectacular, and that has been going on for around about 15 minutes. It looks like it might be coming to a close because it looks fairly intense there. That is Copacabana beach. Thousands of people enjoying fireworks there live in Brazil. Well, people have seen in the new year in towns and cities around the UK too. In London, the usual public firework display was moved to a secret location to avoid crowds turning out. Instead, people were encouraged to watch the event on TV. It followed earlier celebrations in Asia and Europe, as Louise Pilbeam now reports.
Light after another dark year of the pandemic. The UK's New Year's Eve, a breathtaking fireworks and light show performed to London's quieter streets, with millions following advice to stay at home and watch on television.
Again and again they stream forward, looking for an opening. This looks promising and...
Celebrating successes in another tough year, like the England football team in the Euros. The plans kept under wraps to avoid crowds turning up. Many travelled from Scotland and Wales into England, where there are no restrictions after those nations' New Year's celebrations were cancelled. Sydney's skies lit up first, showing the world how it's done, with the biggest fireworks display on the planet. 6 tons of fireworks over Sydney Harbour in front of crowds.
3, 2,
Asia next to welcome the new year. Hong Kong's spectacular Victoria Harbour allowing crowds for the first time since 2018. The pandemic and social unrest cancelling previous years. China's capital signalled towards 2022 by showing off to the world their Olympic tower ahead of the Winter Games in February. Then came Moscow's moment, its pristine red square deserted, closed off to the public amid Omicron concerns. Athens' ancient Parthenon has stood through time's other pandemics. The city's restaurants and bars below allowed to open with no standing or music and a 2 a.m. curfew. Large, lively crowds in Madrid's Puerta del Sol Square, the Spanish capital's version of Times Square, as New York prepares to party. Closely packed crowds in Goa, Western India, squeezed together on the beaches for fireworks and fun. The world ringing in the new year in different ways, but with a united hope for a better year. Louisa Pilbeam, BBC News.
But the new year, of course, still being welcomed in right now across the United States.
That's right. So let's go to Times Square in New York, where the famous Golden Ball dropped over an hour ago in front of around 15,000 people. And CBS reporter Courtney Keeley is there for us now. Courtney, there is a much bigger crowd there than last year, of course, isn't there?
Yes, good morning. There were about 200 people here in Times Square last year. They were health workers, frontline workers. This year it was about 15,000, capped at 15,000. A grim statistic right now is that's 10,000 less people than are testing positive every day right now here for the coronavirus due to this Omicron variant. But it was a festive crowd. People came from different parts of the world, as they always do. I talked to someone from Britain, from South London, in fact, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Japan. People telling me that they were still joyous to be here despite COVID. They were happy to be vaccinated. We saw the new mayor of New York City be sworn in right after midnight, starting a new era in New York, too, after 8 years of Bill de Blasio, which many among the chattering classes here are ready to see leave, as well as they're ready to see the pandemic subside. They're ready to see New York come back to life. And there was a little bit of New York coming back to life. We saw the fireworks, the confetti, and that iconic ball still dropping, still ringing in the new year for people here and televising it across the country.
Well, Courtney, here in the UK, things have very much been scaled back. How different are the celebrations there in New York from usual?
Well, they're completely different. There's a feeling of hopelessness, but there's a feeling of grim reality as well. One of the people I spoke to who is from Britain said, this will be the New Year's Eve that I'll always remember, when I came to Times Square and I'll tell my children how I wore a mask to celebrate. There's only 2 times in history that the ball did not drop. There were 2 years during World War II where the U.S. government did not want to light up Times Square because they were afraid of attacks. So it was completely lit up. The confetti flew. Frank Sinatra sang. You know, they always broadcast New York, New York. It had that feeling of festivity. But right now, the streets are cleared. They're going to be cleaning them up. And another thing that's really interesting and not very good is that many of the police officers tonight that were on duty were already on overtime, because about 20% of the police force here, the NYPD, is homesick from COVID.